Captain Addison Sanders sat in the cockpit of her CH-47 Chinook helicopter, listening to a radio transmission that made her blood run cold. All units, be advised. Operation Valkyrie is a complete loss. SEAL Teams 2, 5, and 8 are cut off in the Korangal Valley. Estimated 180 operators surrounded by Taliban forces, numbering 800 plus. Weather conditions prohibit air support. Ground relief is 48 hours out. Command assessment, total loss expected within 6 hours. All aircraft are ordered to remain at base. Repeat, no rescue attempts authorized. Addison's co-pilot, Warrant Officer Marcus Webb, looked at her with an expression that mixed disbelief with resignation. They're writing them off, 180 SEALs, and command is just leaving them? That's not an assessment, Addison said quietly, her voice tight with controlled fury. That's a death sentence. She'd been flying combat rescue missions in Afghanistan for 3 years. She'd pulled wounded soldiers from hot landing zones, evacuated entire platoons under fire, and landed her Chinook in places that flight manuals said were impossible. She'd earned her reputation as one of the best helicopter pilots in the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers. But she'd never faced a situation like this. 180 Navy SEALs, America's most elite warriors, trapped in a valley that was about to become their tomb. Command had run the numbers, assessed the risks, and made the cold calculation that sending rescue birds into that situation would just add more casualties to an already catastrophic loss. They were probably right. The weather was deteriorating fast, a late-season storm system moving through the Hindu Kush Mountains, bringing winds that made helicopter flight suicidal and visibility that made navigation nearly impossible. The Taliban had positioned anti-aircraft weapons throughout the valley, and they knew exactly where the SEALs were. Any helicopter that flew into that valley would be flying into a meat grinder. Command was making the rational choice, the smart choice, the choice that saved helicopters and pilots for missions that had better odds of success. Addison had always followed orders, always played by the rules, always been the model officer that the Army wanted, professional, disciplined, reliable. But she was also the daughter of a Marine who died in Fallujah when his squad was pinned down and reinforcements couldn't reach them in time. She'd joined the Army promising herself that she'd never let that happen to anyone else if she had the power to prevent it. And right now, she had a helicopter, fuel in the tanks, and the skills to fly it into hell if necessary. Marcus, she said, her hands already moving across the control panel, starting pre-flight checks. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay, he replied cautiously, watching her flip switches and check gauges. Can you fly this bird back to base by yourself? Marcus went very still. Addison, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that command gave an order I can't follow. I'm thinking that 180 SEALs are going to die if someone doesn't do something, and I'm thinking that I'm going to do something, and I don't want to drag you down with me when I get court-martialed for it. You're serious. It wasn't a question. Marcus had flown with her long enough to recognize when she'd made a decision. You're actually going to defy a direct order, fly into the worst weather we've seen in months, through a valley full of anti-aircraft weapons, to attempt a rescue that command has deemed impossible. Yes. That's insane. It's career suicide. It's probably actual suicide. He paused, then began running his own pre-flight checks. I'm coming with you. Marcus, if you're going to get court-martialed for this, I'm not letting you do it alone. Besides, he grinned without humor, you're going to need a co-pilot. That valley's going to eat you alive if you try to fly it solo. Addison felt a surge of gratitude mixed with guilt. She was about to destroy both their careers, assuming they survived long enough to face a court-martial. But she couldn't let 180 men die without trying. She keyed her radio, switching to the frequency the trapped SEAL teams were using. Any Valkyrie units? This is Night Stalker 4-6. Do you copy? Static. Then a voice, tight with stress and exhaustion. Night Stalker 4-6, this is Valkyrie 2-1. We read you. Be advised, we are combat ineffective, ammunition critical, casualties mounting, Taliban forces closing on all sides. We've accepted that extraction is not possible. We're preparing for last stand. Recommend you maintain distance and preserve aircraft for operations that matter. The voice belonged to someone who'd already accepted death, someone who was trying to save others from dying with them. Valkyrie 2-1, negative. I'm inbound for extraction. Prepare your wounded for immediate medevac. I'll be in your LZ in 30 minutes. A long pause. Then, Night Stalker 4-6. You're not authorized for this mission. Command has ordered no fly for this sector. I'm aware of Command's orders, Valkyrie 2-1. I'm also aware that you and 179 other operators are about to die if someone doesn't ignore those orders. Prepare for extraction. Night Stalker 4-6 out. She switched back to the base frequency, knowing what was coming. The radio erupted almost immediately. Night Stalker 4-6, this is Bagram Tower. You are not cleared for takeoff. Repeat, you are not cleared for takeoff. Shut down your aircraft immediately. Addison pulled the collective, feeling the Chinook lift off the pad. Bagram Tower, Night Stalker 4-6, I'm declaring emergency authority under combat search and rescue protocols. I have American forces in imminent danger, and I'm moving to assist. 4-6 is outbound. Night Stalker. 4-6, you are disobeying a direct order. Return to base immediately or you will face court-martial. Understood, Tower. I'll see you at the court-martial, if I survive long enough to attend. She switched off the radio before they could respond. Marcus was already pulling up the navigation data for the Korangal Valley. You know this is probably the last flight we'll ever make as Army pilots. I know. Addison pointed the Chinook toward the mountains, toward the storm, toward the valley where 180 SEALs were waiting to die. But at least it'll be a flight that matters. The Chinook lifted into the darkening sky, flying toward a mission that Command had declared impossible and that would either save 180 lives or add 2 more names to the casualty list. Addison had made her choice. Now she just had to survive it. 90 minutes earlier, the operation had started perfectly. 3 SEAL teams, 60 operators each, 180 total, had been inserted into the Korangal Valley under cover of darkness to capture or kill a high-value target. Rashid Qadir, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across the region. Intelligence said Qadir was meeting with other commanders in a compound deep in the valley. The plan was simple. Fast insertion, hit the compound, secure or eliminate Qadir, extract before the enemy could organize a response. SEAL Team 2 had gone in first, securing the northern approach. Team 5 had taken the compound itself. Team 8 had established a perimeter to the south. Everything had gone according to plan, until it hadn't. The compound was empty. Qadir wasn't there. Neither were any other high-value targets. What was there was a massive weapons cache, communications equipment, and maps showing Taliban positions throughout the valley. It was a trap. And the SEALs had walked right into it. The Taliban had known they were coming. They'd set up the compound as bait, positioned forces on all sides of the valley, and waited for American Special Operations Forces to take the bait. When the SEALs entered the compound, the Taliban had sprung their trap. Anti-aircraft weapons had opened up on the extraction helicopters before they could land. 2 Blackhawks had been hit, one destroyed completely, killing the crew of 4. The other had limped back to base smoking and barely airworthy. The SEALs, realizing they'd been ambushed, had tried to fight their way out. But they were in a valley surrounded by mountains, with enemy forces on every side. The Taliban had the high ground, the numbers, and the advantage of prepared positions. The SEAL commanders had done what they'd been trained to do, consolidated their forces, established a defensive perimeter, and called for support. But the weather had turned bad. The storm system that weather forecasters had predicted for the next day had arrived early, bringing winds that grounded helicopters and clouds that made close air support impossible. Apache gunships couldn't fly. A-10 Warthogs couldn't see targets through the clouds. Even drones were useless in the turbulence. Command had tried everything. They'd attempted to send in a relief force by ground, but the nearest friendly forces were 48 hours away through hostile territory. They'd tried to coordinate with Afghan forces, but those units were either unable or unwilling to enter a valley that was clearly a death trap. The SEALs were on their own. With ammunition running low, casualties mounting, and enemy forces closing in from all sides, they had maybe 6 hours before the defensive perimeter collapsed. Command had made the assessment. The mission was a complete loss. The risk of sending more forces into that situation outweighed the potential for success. The official position was that no rescue would be attempted. The unofficial position, the one that made Addison's decision easier, was that command was abandoning 180 operators because the math didn't work out in favor of rescue. She understood the calculation. She even agreed with it, intellectually. Sending helicopters into that valley in these weather conditions, through known anti-aircraft positions with no close air support, was suicide. But she also understood something that the colonels and generals sitting in comfortable operation centers didn't. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the stupidest, most dangerous, most likely to get you killed thing you could possibly do. And sometimes you had to do it anyway. The flight into hell. The weather was worse than Addison had expected. Much worse. The wind hit them as soon as they gained altitude, buffeting the Chinook like a toy. Gusts of 50, 60, 70 miles per hour slammed into the aircraft from different directions, making steady flight nearly impossible. "This is insane," Marcus said, fighting his controls as another gust nearly flipped them sideways. "We're going to get torn apart before we even reach the valley." "Then we better fly faster than the weather can catch us," Addison replied, pushing the Chinook forward, using every bit of speed the aircraft could manage. The Chinook was a workhorse, reliable, powerful, capable of carrying massive loads. But it wasn't agile, it wasn't fast, and it definitely wasn't designed to fly through mountain storms that would ground most aircraft. But Addison wasn't most pilots. She'd grown up flying. Her father had taken her up in small planes when she was 6 years old. She'd soloed at 16, earned her helicopter rating at 18, and joined the Army at 20. She'd spent 10 years learning to fly helicopters in conditions that would terrify civilian pilots: sandstorms, whiteout blizzards, combat zones where the enemy was actively trying to kill you. She knew how to read weather, how to anticipate wind patterns, how to find the pockets of stable air between the gusts. She knew how to use terrain to shield her aircraft, how to fly just above the ground to avoid the worst turbulence, how to make a 30-ton helicopter dance through spaces that looked impossible. She was going to need all of that knowledge now. "Approaching the valley," Marcus called out, checking their navigation. "Taliban positions should be everywhere. Anti-aircraft weapons confirmed at 3 locations. Probably more we don't know about. Then we fly low and fast. Make ourselves hard to track, harder to hit." Addison dropped the Chinook toward the deck, flying barely 200 feet above the mountainside, using the terrain to mask their approach. The radio crackled. "Night Stalker 4-6, this is Valkyrie 2-1. We're tracking your approach. Be advised, valley is extremely hot. We count at least 6 anti-aircraft positions, multiple heavy machine guns, and probably shoulder-fired missiles. Weather is deteriorating. Visibility is maybe 200 meters. You need to turn back." "Negative, Valkyrie 2-1. I'm committed. Give me your exact position and have your wounded ready for immediate load." 4-6. "There are 80-plus casualties. Critical cases alone number 30. You can't possibly evacuate everyone in one trip." Addison had already done the math. A Chinook could carry roughly 55 troops in addition to crew. With 180 SEALs in the valley, she'd need at least 3 trips. More, probably, given casualties and equipment. 3 trips, into a valley surrounded by enemy forces, in weather that was getting worse by the minute, with anti-aircraft weapons tracking every move. She'd be lucky to survive 1 trip. 3 was impossible. "Then I'll make multiple trips," she said simply. "First priority is critical casualties. Get them to the LZ. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Marcus looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Multiple trips? Addison, we probably won't survive this 1 trip. If we go back in there again, then we go back until everyone's out or we're dead. Those are the only 2 options I'm considering." She saw it ahead. The valley mouth, a narrow gap between towering mountains, clouds scraping the peaks, visibility dropping to almost nothing. It looked like flying into a tunnel that led straight to hell. "Here we go," Addison said and pointed the Chinook into the valley. The world exploded around them. Tracer rounds lanced through the air, bright lines of death searching for the helicopter. Explosions erupted from anti-aircraft positions, dug into the mountainsides. The air filled with steel and fire, all of it aimed at the Chinook. Addison threw the helicopter into evasive maneuvers, hard banks, sudden climbs, dropping into gullies and then popping back up, using every bit of terrain to break the enemy's targeting solutions. Rounds sparked off the armored hull. Explosions rocked the aircraft. Alarms screamed warnings about damage, about systems failures, about 1,000 ways they were about to die. But the Chinook kept flying. "LZ ahead," Marcus called. "I see friendlies." Through the smoke and chaos, Addison spotted them. SEALs in defensive positions, a cleared area in the center where casualties lay on stretchers, and enemy forces closing in from all sides. She didn't have time for a careful landing. She dropped the Chinook into the LZ hard, the wheels hitting with a jarring impact that made the whole aircraft shudder. "Go! Go! Go!" she shouted into the troop compartment intercom. The rear ramp was already dropping. SEALs poured toward the helicopter, carrying stretchers with wounded men. They moved with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them, loading casualties, securing equipment, covering the aircraft with suppressive fire. Addison kept the engines hot, ready to lift off at any second. Rounds pinged off the armored hull. An RPG streaked past, so close she felt the heat of its exhaust. The SEALs fired back, holding the perimeter, buying time for the wounded to load. 30 seconds! Marcus counted down, watching the load. A SEAL commander, bearing the rank of a captain, ran up to the cockpit, shouting to be heard over the engine noise. "You're either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest. We're loading the critical cases now. 33 wounded coming with you. But we've still got 147 operators here, and the enemy's closing fast." "Then I'll be back," Addison shouted. "Get them ready for the next lift." "You're coming back? Into this?" The captain looked at her like she was insane, which, she reflected, was probably accurate. "I'm not leaving until everyone's out, or I'm dead. Get ready for my next approach in 20 minutes. "Loaded," Marcus called. 33 wounded, plus 4 medics to manage them in transit. We're at max capacity. Addison pulled the collective, lifting the Chinook out of the LZ. Immediately, every anti-aircraft weapon in the valley opened fire. The sky filled with tracers and explosions. An alarm screamed that a missile had locked onto them. She threw the Chinook into a violent evasive maneuver, dropping into a ravine, using the terrain to break the missile's lock. The missile streaked past and detonated against the mountainside. "We're taking hits," Marcus reported. "Hydraulics are damaged, fuel line has a leak, electrical system showing faults." "Will she keep flying?" "For now, but I don't know how much more damage she can take." Addison didn't answer. She focused on flying, on threading the Chinook through the valley, dodging fire, using every trick she knew to keep the aircraft in the air, and moving toward safety. They burst out of the valley mouth into clearer air. The anti-aircraft fire fell away. The storm was still there, still brutal, but after the hell of the valley it felt almost peaceful. 33 down, 147 to go, Addison said grimly, setting course back to Bagram to drop off casualties and refuel. "And then," Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer, "then we go back. As many times as it takes." The second run. Bagram Air Base was in chaos when they landed. The wounded were rushed off the Chinook by waiting medics. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, assessing damage, preparing to refuel, and military police were waiting. A Colonel Addison didn't recognize approached as she climbed out of the cockpit. "Captain Sanders, you're under arrest for disobeying direct orders, unauthorized mission, and reckless endangerment." "I'm also going back to get the rest of my passengers," Addison replied calmly, "so you're going to have to arrest me later." "Captain, you're not going anywhere except the brig. I've been ordered to ground your aircraft and detain you pending court-martial." "Colonel, Addison said, her voice hard. "There are 147 Navy SEALs still trapped in that valley. They're going to die if someone doesn't extract them. I'm the only pilot crazy enough to try. So you have two choices. Let me go back and get them, or explain to their families why you stopped me." The order came from, "I don't care if it came from the president himself." "I'm going back. You can court-martial me, dishonorably discharge me, throw me in Leavenworth for the rest of my life. But I'm going back for those men first." The colonel stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he stepped aside. "Ground crew, expedite the refuel and repair. Captain Sanders launches in 15 minutes. Addison blinked. "Sir?" "I said 15 minutes, Captain. If you're going to disobey orders and destroy your career, the least I can do is make sure your helicopter is airworthy when you do it." He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "My son is a SEAL. Team 5. He's in that valley. Bring him home." "I will, sir. I'll bring them all home." 15 minutes later, Addison lifted off from Bagram for the second time. The Chinook repaired as much as field crews could manage in the time available. She knew she was probably flying a death trap, too much damage, too many systems compromised. But she also knew that 147 men were depending on her. The second approach was worse than the first. The Taliban knew a helicopter had gotten in and out, and they were ready. They'd repositioned their anti-aircraft weapons, reinforced their positions, and were waiting for her return. Addison flew a different route this time, approaching from the west instead of the north, using a different mountain pass to enter the valley. It helped. She got past the first line of defenses before they spotted her. But once they did, all hell broke loose again. The Chinook shuddered under multiple impacts. Alarms screamed. Marcus called out damage reports in a steady stream. Hydraulics hit, engine temperature rising, oil pressure dropping, tail rotor damaged. But still the Chinook flew. She made the landing, loaded 52 more SEALs, fewer than she'd hoped. But the SEALs were loading equipment now too, weapons and intelligence materials they couldn't leave behind. She lifted off through the same gauntlet of fire, dodging and weaving, hearing rounds punch through the hull, feeling the aircraft struggle to respond to her controls. They made it out, barely, 95 down, 85 to go. The third run. The Chinook was dying. Addison could feel it, the sluggish response to controls, the worrying vibration in the airframe, the warning lights that kept flashing on her instrument panel. "We're not going to make a fourth trip," Marcus said quietly as they approached Bagram. The birds held together with prayers and duct tape. "One more run and she'll shake apart." "Then we'll make this third run count," Addison replied. "We get everyone out this time, all 85 of them." That's impossible. We're already over weight limits with 50 passengers. 85 will be everyone. I'm not leaving anyone behind, Marcus. Not one." They landed at Bagram long enough to drop off the second load and take on fuel. No MPs tried to stop her this time. Word had spread about what she was doing, and everyone, from the ground crews to the base commander, was helping however they could. The third approach was through hell itself. The Taliban had figured out her pattern, and they were ready. Anti-aircraft fire was so heavy that the sky looked solid with tracers. Missiles streaked upward. The Chinook took hit after hit. "Engine 2 is losing power," Marcus shouted. "We're on fire!" "Suppress the fire and keep flying!" Addison fought the controls as the helicopter tried to spiral out of the sky. They reached the LZ. The remaining 85 SEALs were ready, consolidated into one group, with their wounded in the center. They loaded with desperate speed, knowing this was the last chance. "We're overloaded," Marcus reported. "Way overloaded. The aircraft can't. It'll fly," Addison said through gritted teeth. "I'll make it fly." She pulled the collective, asking the damaged, overloaded Chinook to do something it shouldn't be capable of. The engine screamed. The airframe groaned. Every system was redlined. But slowly, impossibly, the Chinook lifted off. They were maybe 50 feet up when the missile hit. The explosion tore through the tail section, shredding the rear rotor. The Chinook spun violently, completely out of control. Alarms screamed. Marcus was shouting something. The ground was rushing up toward them. Addison's hands moved across the controls with desperate precision. She couldn't stop the spin, but she could slow it. She couldn't save the aircraft, but she could control how it crashed. They hit the ground hard, the impact crushing landing gear and buckling metal. The Chinook slid across the rocky terrain, tearing itself apart, shedding pieces, but maintaining just enough structural integrity to protect the people inside. When they finally stopped, Addison was still alive, still conscious, still at the controls. "Everyone out," she shouted. "Move! Move! Move!" SEALs poured out of the broken helicopter, some helping wounded, others taking up defensive positions. The Taliban was closing in, sensing victory. But they hadn't counted on what 180 Navy SEALs could do when cornered and fighting for their lives. The SEALs formed a perimeter, and what followed was the kind of close-quarters battle that Special Operations Forces trained for. Despite being outnumbered and low on ammunition, the SEALs were professionals at the peak of their craft. They held the line. And then, like the cavalry in an old Western, salvation arrived. Apache gunships screamed over the valley rim. The storm had broken just enough for them to fly, and when they saw the grounded Chinook surrounded by enemy forces, they didn't hesitate. Hellfire missiles and 30-millimeter cannons tore into the Taliban positions. Within minutes, the tide had turned. The enemy was in retreat, and more helicopters were inbound, a full combat rescue package that command had scrambled the moment word had spread about Addison's third run. It took 6 more helicopters to evacuate everyone, including Addison, Marcus, and the crews of the destroyed aircraft. But everyone made it out, all 180 SEALs, all the wounded, everyone, because one pilot had defied orders and flown into hell. The court-martial lasted 3 days. Addison was charged with disobeying direct orders, unauthorized mission, and reckless endangerment of aircraft and personnel. She pleaded guilty to all charges. The prosecutor recommended dishonorable discharge and prison time. But then something unexpected happened. The SEALs showed up. All 180 of them. They packed the courtroom. They testified, one after another, about the pilot who'd flown into impossible conditions to save them. They described the skill, the courage, the determination that had brought them home alive. The SEAL captain, whose father was the colonel who'd let her fly that second mission, testified that Addison Sanders was the finest pilot he'd ever served with. The panel deliberated for 20 minutes. Guilty of all charges, sentenced to a formal reprimand and 30 days of confinement to base, and recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. 6 months later, Addison stood in a ceremony at the Pentagon while the Secretary of Defense pinned the medal on her uniform. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety in the successful rescue of 180 personnel under extreme combat conditions. What it didn't mention was that she defied orders, risked court-martial, and destroyed a multi-million-dollar helicopter to do it. After the ceremony, the SEAL captain found her. "My father asked me to give you something." He handed her a small wooden plaque. Engraved on it was a simple message: "Sometimes the right order is the one you refuse to follow." Addison smiled. "Tell your father thank you for everything. He said to tell you that he'd fly with you any time, and so would every SEAL who was in that valley." Later, as she stood watching the sunset over the Pentagon, Marcus found her. "So, was it worth it? The court-martial, the career damage, all of it?" Addison thought about 180 SEALs who'd gone home to their families, thought about the colonel's son who was alive because she'd flown, thought about the choice she'd made when command had written them off. "Yeah," she said quietly, "it was worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat," and she meant it. As they walked away from the railing, Addison took one last look at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, in war zones around the world, pilots were flying missions. Some would face impossible choices. Some would be ordered to abandon people they could save. She hoped they'd remember her story, hoped they'd know that sometimes the right thing to do was defy orders and fly into hell anyway. Because that's what warriors did. That's what it meant to serve. And Addison Sanders would do it all again in a heartbeat. The 180 SEALs she'd saved that day went on to complete thousands more missions. They rescued hostages, eliminated terrorists, and trained the next generation of operators. Each one of them carried the memory of the pilot who'd refused to leave them behind. Years later, when Addison finally retired from service, all 180 attended the ceremony. They stood as one when she walked in, a silent salute to the woman who'd proven that sometimes one person's courage can change everything. Her story became legend in military aviation schools. Instructors taught it as a case study in decision-making under pressure. But more than that, it became a reminder that rules and orders exist to guide us, but conscience must be the final authority. That sometimes the most important mission is the one nobody authorized, and that the measure of a warrior isn't found in following orders, but in knowing when the right thing to do is to refuse them. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.